Today we're going to look at the third principle in Nehemiah chapter 1 that will help us live an inspiring story. We already saw how Nehemiah started by asking questions so he could discover the needs, and then how he allowed himself to be burdened by the suffering of the people. Today we'll see how that burden motivated him towards responsive action and how that responsive action actually looks. It might be a little bit different than you expect. You might expect Nehemiah to start to actually try to solve the problem on his own. Oftentimes, when we find out about an issue, we start to think about how we can take care of it on our own power. But Nehemiah teaches us that that shouldn't be the first thing that we do. The Bible tells us that after he sits down and weeps and mourns for many days, that he fasts and he prays to the God of heaven. Look, Nehemiah doesn't trust in his own power and qualifications that are admittedly limited. We all are limited in our own qualifications. Instead, he turns to the God who can do immeasurably more than we could ever think or imagine. So when you discover needs and you gain a burden because of your compassion, because God has placed it inside of you, don't try to turn to your own strength to do it first. Instead, turn to the God of heaven. If you try to take on that burden on your own power, chances are that burden will crush you. But Nehemiah teaches us that we ought to go to the God who says, my burden is light and my yoke is easy. He's one that can do more than we could ever think or imagine. And when that happens, when we start to trust God and we start to seek God and his kingdom and his righteousness first, then we start to see everything else fall into place. We start to see an inspirational story falling out of our lives that gives glory to God and makes a big difference. And so I want to encourage you today. If you want to live an inspiring story, but you know you're not necessarily an inspirational person, certainly not compared to God himself, turn to the God of heaven. Don't trust in horses, don't trust in chariots, don't trust in your own education qualifications, your resources, your connections. Trust in the God of heaven. It'll make a difference. It'll produce an inspirational story.